Hi, Peter, and dear participants of the 2021 Southeast European Aviation Summit. It's a great pleasure being with you today, albeit this time virtually. Embraer is a true believer in the physical events that we've had in the last couple of years organized by Peter. We've been to all of them since the launch in 2018. Brief introduction. My name is Stefan Hannemann. I'm a sales director here at Embraer Commercial Aviation, looking after European accounts, including the CIAS region. With me as well, we have got Daniele Sansone. Daniele, please, an introduction from your side.
I'm the marketing manager and I cover Europe as well, and I work together with Stefan, so I'm responsible of all the marketing side.
Perfect. And we've got round about 20 minutes with you guys today. We would love to share an update what we're doing at Embraer Commercial Aviation. Of course, the big topic these days continues to be around the pandemic. We are optimistic that we are now at least 2/3 through and we can see a light at the end of the tunnel. So we would like to share with you a few drivers around how we see airlines adapt their fleet strategy into the future post-pandemic. We'd love to share with you our thoughts on the Southeastern European aviation landscape in general, share with you what we at Embraer believe we can do to support the airlines in that market. And then lastly, Daniele will also have a few minutes time to share with you an update on our next generation aircraft family, the E-Jets E2. And we hope it's going to be very interesting with you, for you. And we would love to hear your feedback, any questions you have. Daniele and myself in the aftermath of the event, we would be delighted to answer your questions and get in touch. Very good, Daniele. I would say we kick it off.
We can start.
Very good. Here we go. Perfect.
Great.
So just as we said, Daniele and myself, we look after the region. So it would be a pleasure to get in touch with industry professionals from the region after and through the event. Let's share a little bit of an update where we are as Embraer. We've got 4 business units as a company. That's commercial aviation, executive jet business, military and defense, and then our services and support business unit. We are representing commercial aviation, which is the biggest business unit of Embraer. And I'm hopeful that many of you have had the pleasure to fly our product globally and certainly across Europe in the past. On a global context, our E-Jets E1 and the second generation is present throughout the world. We are recognized as the global leader in the regional aviation space. We have more than 1,400 aircraft currently operating around the globe, with some 80 airlines in more than 50 countries. And the E-Jets, the E1 and the next generation, the E2, they have taken very versatile roles. Our aircraft are operating for network airlines globally. They are operating for low-cost applications in the regional space, very specialized operations. So I'm sure you can find our aircraft all around the world. The pandemic, of course, has also hit Embraer. As you know, Brazil was one of the countries that was quite heavily affected by the coronavirus, but the situation is now improving. So part of the production also had to be reduced for some time, and we're now ramping up again. And there's more positive news coming out of Brazil. I think, Daniele, you can share this. Just around 10 days ago, we made an announcement for the sale of 30 E195 E2s. So that's our flagship aircraft. These aircraft are going to be delivered already from 2022 forward. And I'm sure that they are going to do a great job at the future operator. So you can see that whereas 2020 has, of course, been a challenging year for airlines and aircraft manufacturers. What we really feel right now is that we have very intense and expediting discussions with airline executives all around the world, which are obviously looking to understand and talk to us around what is the right fleet type to have the flexibility and adaptability that airlines will need to fly out of the crisis. So we see airlines taking decisions, especially in our space. What was very interesting throughout 2020 and 2021, whereas larger narrow bodies, A320s, 737s around the globe had suffered immensely in terms of their production and being put into long-term parking. What we actually saw in the regional space with the E1s globally, but certainly also in Europe, is that there was a real uptick in the way that our aircraft was being used across airlines in the region. Our E-jets continued flying because when there was less demand, the airlines still wanted to keep up some sort of a network to provide a basic network for the demand and for the passengers. And the E-jets turned out to be a great provider in this very critical moment.
Maybe we can say also that we didn't have any cancellation. That's proud for us, because even during pandemic, yeah.
Exactly. During the pandemic, no cancellations. So airlines stick to their orders. And as I just said, we look positive into the future that the pandemic is going to very much drive demand for the smaller scale aircraft, the E1, but particularly for the next generation E2. In the European space, that's probably next to North America, our most dense network of customers that we have. There's more than 400 E-jets, E1 and E2 in service today, with more than 31 airlines. You can see there on the screen, there's a huge spider web for all of the network analysts perhaps joining now. I think that's quite impressive. You will really see our E-jets flying all over the place. I shared beforehand some of the applications, and just to discuss further, you will see the big names: KLM, Cityhopper, the Lufthansa Group, British Airways, Air France, Hop, all flying our aircraft. There, the E1 and the E2 truly have the role to support the hubs with frequency. Frequency is important and vital for those hubs to keep up connectivity. Whenever you take a frequency out, then you are deteriorating the overall efficiency of the hub. So the E-jets play a very critical role there. I was just talking about KLM Cityhopper. They now have 4 E195 E2s in service. Here in Amsterdam. We saw the aircraft just the other day, so that's fantastic. Just to expand a bit more on the operators, we have also very specialized operators like TUI. TUI, as a major leisure group, is using our aircraft, especially from the Belgian market, to go into very thin routes. Some of it is ethnic travel, going towards the Balkan region, Northern Africa, where there's steady but small demand. And of course, the aircraft has a fantastic role for TUI to support the shoulder seasons. So the season between the low and the high season, the aircraft is doing a great job. And that's one of the areas where we see great room for application in the Southeast European aviation market. Just to round it off, we have great news to share. In the region, Air Montenegro, a new airline that is being launched, is going to start operating in the next coming weeks with a fleet of E195. So we are very excited about this, about building the partnership with Montenegro. And we're hopeful that sometime this year we can hop down to Podgorica or Tivat to join the guys on one of their flights.
And we can add another bubble to the list.
Exactly, yeah. That's true. One of the main points, and we discussed it in the very beginning, is of course around the pandemic. I think a few months ago or 1 year ago, when we were discussing with airlines, we were still discussing the questions: is the pandemic going to have a long-lasting impact on the travel industry, on demand, on the way that we're going to fly in the future? And back in the day, I think we were all a little bit inconclusive. It had to do with the depth, but also much more with the duration of the pandemic. Now, speaking to you in May 2021, I think it's a hypothetical question to discuss if the pandemic is going to have a lasting impact. It's going to have a massive impact. We will talk about it in a moment. But what I find extremely interesting, before you think about how the future is going to look like, researchers, forecasters, analysts, of course, what we do is we look into the rear mirror to understand, has there been a similar event of magnitude, and how did the market respond afterwards, the air travel market? Without a doubt, and this word has been oversubscribed last year, but I'm going to use it again. It's been an unprecedented situation that we're facing right now. If you look at this chart, which I love very much, if you look into the RPK, global RPK development over the last 40 years, we have looked at regional or global events and how that affected the RPKs in that particular year. Interestingly enough, you will realize that over the last 40 years, there has only really been 2 years where there was a negative RPK growth. That was the 9/11 attacks and the global financial crisis, 2009, 2010. But the impact overall on RPK has been quite marginal, because whereas some parts of, let's say, the global financial crisis, some parts of the, let's say, the industrialized world was hit very hard, emerging countries, especially in Asia Pacific, think about the Middle East, think about Africa and Latin America, they still continue to grow. What we see now with the pandemic is we see the impact on a global level, on a global scale, 60% RPK loss throughout the full year of 2020. That truly is unprecedented. I just said it again. And of course, this is going to have an impact on the long-term growth of the industry, because what is happening is a lot of the growth was propelled by low mid-income emerging markets in the past. And we believe that this is one of the reasons why, looking now into the future, we believe that we're going to go into a parallel universe, which means we will, for a very distinctive period of time, lag behind, and probably always will lag the growth predictions that we've had in 2019, looking into the future. There's a lot of debate around airlines around when, in terms of an RPK point of view, will airlines return to the same level as we've had before the pandemic. I think there's a consensus with most airlines around the world. It's going to be somewhere between probably 2024, 2025. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's so important to critically determine exactly what year, what months this is going to happen. I think what is much more important is to understand that the market in itself, the demand is going to be smaller. It's going to be a smaller, more nimble industry. We believe that by the end of this decade, by 2029, overall, we will lag behind in demand around 20% versus the forecast that we've had before the pandemic. In terms of the phases for the next 8 to 9 years, there's probably 2 phases. The first one, we call it restoring. That's basically for the RPKs to go back to the level that we've had before the pandemic. And then afterwards, we call this period growing slower, is when we will hopefully go into a little bit more of a smooth weather again, and then for airlines to put into place new developed strategies. Probably the more interesting question on this slide for anyone in the audience who's working for an airline in fleet or network planning is if we could describe, the phase that we're going through right now until the end of the decade. I think overall there's probably 4 phases. The first one, and that's where we're in right now, and we have the honor to speak to airlines on a daily basis, is about managing the uncertainty. I think every airline strategist will tell you it's probably easier today to predict how the airline will look like in 10 years versus what's happening next month. That has to do a lot with the speed of the vaccinations. There's now more than 1 billion shots carried out globally, but very big variances. It will have to do a lot with how will governments, especially here in Europe, talking about the European space, how are they going to address travel restrictions? Is there going to be basically a multilateral one approach on how we can start flying again this summer? Because otherwise I could see the European Union perhaps creating quite a mess in terms of vaccination, testing before you go, testing when you come back, and all of that can drive the recovery in this very moment for the summer season. So first step is really about managing the uncertainty. And then the second stage that we're going to go into will be to see new competitive dynamics that we will already see probably happening in the start of the summer season, and certainly over the winter next year. There will be a lot of capacity going into the market for still a rather limited demand. So I think we're going to see quite some price battles there. And it's quite interesting to read about what the airlines are doing. Some airlines are taking a bit of a more of a conservative approach and looking into a right sizing, potentially optimizing the operation of the airline, potentially shutting down hubs. And then on the other spectrum, you have a lot of the low-cost carriers, but also carriers like the Lufthansa Group, who are reshifting for the short term their strategic view in terms of putting a lot of capacity into the leisure space, because that's clear. Leisure is going to recover first, then VFR, and then the business is probably the last sector to recover. So that was the second phase, you can say, the new competitive dynamics. And then probably around 23, 24, I believe a lot of the airlines, having flown out of the storm, are going to have to recalibrate the strategy moving forward in terms of how do you look like, who do you aspire to be as an airline from a fleet point of view, a network, distribution, who is your future customer. So we believe a lot of the airlines will have to update any of their mid and long-term forecast and strategic outlooks that they've had before the pandemic. And then the last phase will be about implementation. I think we will see a lot of airlines that are going to implement new strategies, will phase in a new fleet towards the end of, towards the middle and the end of the decade. So those are basically the 4, you could say the 4 pillars that we see now flying out of the crisis from a strategic point of view. As we move on here, Daniele, what we can see across the world, but I will talk more specifically about the European region, is there are several new trends that we see. Some of them, they started already before the pandemic, and some of them, they certainly have been amplified by the pandemic. And I will want to share with you the kind of impact we see this is going to have for airlines. But I will also share with you why we as Embraer, we are quite confident and bullish that some of those changes will significantly increase the interest of airlines to continue talking to us and looking into our product. Right sizing, I think that's an absolute no-brainer. We've talked about this is the bread and butter of the Embraer DNA. we've always been talking to airlines about right sizing, having the right capacity for the right demand. Out of the crisis, with the market being smaller, I think what we're going to see is airlines are going to right size their fleets. And right sizing happens everywhere. That's a 747 being right sized to a 787 or an A350. That's a 321 being right sized to a 320. But if you look globally, the bulk of aircraft operating around the world are narrow body aircraft. 319, 320, 737, 700, 800s. And when there's going to be less demand for the foreseeable future, we see a lot of those airlines looking very critically in what is actually the right aircraft size to me, either to replace some of that aircraft or to complement. And especially the 195 E2, which we call the Profit Hunter, that's an aircraft that has around about 138 seats in a single class configuration with unbeatable economics. That could be the right aircraft for those airlines moving forward. That's right sizing. Regionalization, just very quickly, that's about businesses trying to understand how they can turn some of their trade flows, production flows inwards. That started very much already before the pandemic, but it's been amplified. Just one example, when we went into the pandemic, you saw that a lot of the pharmaceutical industry was in distress because a lot of the medicine, especially for American and European pharmaceutical companies, is not produced in the US or in Europe anymore. It's produced elsewhere. South Asia, for instance, is one of the hubs for this. And we believe that governments, to a certain extent, are going to look into how can this be brought closer to the actual headquarters of the companies. So we actually see that some of the production could go back to Europe. And that's something that could be very favorable for Southeast European market, which is a very interesting market in that field already, benefiting from the proximity and the location inside of Europe, the connectivity it has, and of course, lower labor and production cost. So that could be very beneficial. New passenger behavior. I think one of the factors, us speaking to you today over the Zoom call, albeit we would have loved to be in Belgrade talking and engaging with you all interactively. So these kind of media and conference technologies, of course, they are going to have an impact on business traffic moving forward. So we see that business traffic is the last one to recover. On the other hand, we are also exploring new phenomena like work from home. So there might be scenarios where in some companies, you will only have to go to the office physically every so and so often, and that could enable you to live somewhere else that you prefer, and then you commute by train or by plane physically for meetings once a month, twice a month. That's a driver. Another driver from passenger behavior, probably more short and medium term, is that from a sanitary point of view, we believe that passengers will want to travel non-stop. They might have a preference to avoid hubs wherever possible. And again, that is certainly something that speaks in favor of airlines operating smaller aircraft, efficient smaller aircraft that allow them to go point to point and bring the passenger to the final destination without having to go through a hub. And the last point around passenger behavior is certainly around passengers becoming much more critical and much more thoughtful and insightful when it comes about taking a travel decision. Sustainability, the environment, as a separate point here, is gaining a lot of importance for passengers taking decisions. And we will see that in the future, that airline passengers will look into who am I flying with? Are they operating the greenest and quietest fleet? So again, those are drivers that we believe could have a very strong positive effect for Embraer. Very good. Just to give one example on the right sizing trend, that's a very simple one. A wonderful example though is KLM. They are flying 49 E1 current generation aircraft, the 190 and the 175. And it's incredible to see that they have joined us on the E2 program with a big order on the E195 E2. They've got 4 aircraft already in service. And these aircraft is not only the right way for them to upgauge in the future from the 190 to the 195 E2, but it's a perfect replacement and right sizing technique of KLM and KLM Cityhopper to replace some 737-700 aircraft with the 195 E2, delivering much better economics, fantastic performance, a great passenger experience, and simply unbeatable economics.
Yeah, especially because the 737-700 was the smallest of the narrow bodies, so carries the weight, while the E195 E2 is the stretch version. So as Stefan mentioned, has the best economic and performances. We can mention that it will be able to operate on London City Airport. So this is a great achievement.
It's going to be the biggest aircraft that will be able to fly to London City Airport, the 190 E2 and the 195 E2.
Yeah.
And then just to conclude my part here, in the region in itself, Southeastern European travel market, you can see we've have a high focus, the airlines have a high focus on the region, and it's been growing over the last years. In the last 2 years alone, there were more than 18 airlines operating E-jets to the region with more than 100 routes. Those are your Polish Airlines, which is a huge customer of ours. This is Lufthansa, KLM Cityhopper, Austrian, of course, Montenegro Airlines as being an operator within the region. And we've even had some operators like Binter operating the 195 E2 from the Canaries all the way into the region. So we have a strong step there already. And I think that many of you go into the airports in the region, you will have already seen our birds over there, and hopefully you had the pleasure of flying with them. Daniele, maybe you can share a little bit more specific about how we see the fit for the E1 and the E2 in the market.
Yeah, so what we did, we analyzed the market. Here we have an example of Serbia. So what we analyzed was the passenger per departure. So the passenger in average on every flight. And it's impressive to see that 78% of the routes coming in and coming out from Serbia are operated with less than 150 passengers per flight, and 62% even with less than 120. So if you take an example like a flight with maybe 100, 110 passengers operated with a narrow body that usually have 180 or 189 seats, you can result in around 50-55% load factor. And this is a result that already before the pandemic was not acceptable. And now, as we mentioned, the airline will be focused even more on profitability. So now even more than before, it's important to offer the right capacity for the market.
Exactly. I think that was a key point. I think airlines right now globally, there's 2 priorities: reduce losses and then start making profits as fast as possible. And we simply believe that it's unattainable in the future to continue operating with the status quo in terms of the equipment that you operate. When there will be less demand and you fly in big aircraft, you will have a very tricky choice. And the choice is either you continue operating the frequency that you have with less passengers and making losses or less profits, or you need to reduce frequency. And that's one of the issues we see in the region today, is that most of the markets compared to, let's say, Western Europe are operated on lower frequency. So there's not a lot that you can cut on the frequency. And again, we believe the E-jets, the E1 and the E2 could be a perfect tool there to right size and to complement.
Yeah, so still talking about Serbia, just the analysis that we did, the average passenger per departure are around 98. So again, both E1 and E2 families are a perfect fit because they offer the right capacity. The E1 between 70 and 120, and the E2 between 80 and 150. The E1 and E2, the E190E2 and the E195E2 are perfect, as we mentioned before, to replace the narrow bodies. And the E175E2 with around 80 seats is perfect to replace the turboprop that are flying in the region. In fact, over 300 nautical miles, the E175E2 is already more profitable comparing to the turboprops.
That's why we dub it sometimes the turboprop killer. And of course, it rounds up the family of the E2 with the smaller aircraft. And again, it's a fantastic tool to launch new markets at lower economic risk, and of course, to build frequency. And then just another point, Daniele, that strikes me on the slide is the Serbian market in 2019 had 98, so let's call it 100 pax per departure. If our forecasts, which are forecasts from the market, from researchers around the world, hold true, and the impact in demand is around 20% lower, then the Serbian PPD in the future is going to be around 80. So again, even that shows the great fit of the E1 and the E2 for the region.
Yeah. The seasonality, it's another characteristic that we analyzed of the region, and that strengthened our idea that the E-jets, both E1 and E2, are the perfect fit. It's impressive to see that in the winter, there's less than half of the passenger flying compared to the summer. So just to make an example, one airline flying with narrow bodies in the summer with maybe 2-3 frequencies per week, what is it going to do in the winter? It's forced, as we mentioned before, to cut either more the connectivity or even to cancel completely the flight. So this results in the loss of connectivity from the region to the rest of Europe. So that's why the E-jet with the right capacity offered the capability to the airlines to keep flying in the winter, offering the right capacity.
Yeah, and this is something that we see happening around the world. More specifically in the region here in Europe, I think LOT Polish Airlines is a great example. They will have a lot of routes that they fly 2 or 3 times per day in the summer season to leisure markets on a 737. And during the shoulder and winter season, in some of those markets, they keep the frequency and then they just fly a smaller aircraft type. When we talk about right sizing, we're also talking about complementing. The E1 and the E2 have proven to be fantastic aircraft to complement narrow bodies like the 320 and the 737.
And also we can mention that the E195E1 can reach up to 120 seats and the E195E2 up to 150. So even in the summer season, airlines, even with the E-jets, are able to increase the number of frequencies. So for example, with 2 daily flights with the E195, it's possible to offer the same capacity of the A321, but we double the number of frequencies. So when we designed the E2, our goal was to make it the quietest, cleanest, and most efficient single-aisle aircraft. And that's actually what we achieved, and we are proud of that. In fact, the plane has the lowest noise emissions in this category.
Certified.
Certified, yeah, exactly. It has also the lowest CO2 emission, and it's the most efficient, so we have the lowest fuel burn. When you think about a new plane, maybe like the narrow body, usually what other OEM have done is just a re-engine. So just the same aircraft with a different engine. That's not what happened with the A2. The A2 is 80% a new plane compared to the A1. And here's just a summary of everything that we changed. I can pick as an example the new wing. We analyzed 5,000 different wings, and then we chose the best one. We tested them in the wind tunnel, and the results is what you can see, it's amazing, is the highest aspect ratio wing in the category. And the benefits are both on the fuel efficiency, but also on the performances, as we mentioned before, for the short runway airports like London City, Florence, and other airports in the world. Also, we have a new fly-by-wire generation that allowed us to have also a smaller stabilizer, We have a new landing gear, doors. So everything that we did, we improved for the aerodynamics, and the results were a better fuel efficiency and a better performance.
And ultimately, if you're not an engineer like I am, then I think you must think about the efficiency of the aircraft in terms of it has less weight, it weighs less, and there's less drag. So if you compare the E2, for instance, versus an A220, it's simple physics. It's the same engine on both platforms, but we weigh less. So you don't have to be an engineer to understand that this is giving us an edge in terms of economics and efficiency.
We already mentioned our family between the 1 and the 2. What we can add is that we simplified with the 2 the family. So we moved from 4 members to 3 members, and the capacity is more balanced now between 80, 110, and 100, almost 50. And also what we did, we improved the range. We're going to show you later the range from Belgrade. It's impressive and covers every destination that should be reached by an airline in the region. So we mentioned that it's all about efficiency, and we explained you that we chose the best wing for the plane, but we didn't only choose the best wing, we also chose the best wing for every single aircraft member. So the E175 E2 has its own wing, the E190 E2 has its own wing, and also the E195 has its own wing. So again, if we compare, for example, with the A220, where both 100 and 300 has the same wing, what's the result? That the 100 has to bring the weight of the wing of the bigger family member, and that results in the worse fuel efficiency. In our case, every aircraft member has its own optimized wing, and that's amazing. As we mentioned, the range of the E2 has been improved even more compared to the E1, thanks to all the improvement in the engines and in the fuel efficiency and in the fuselage. The E2 can reach more than 2,600 nautical miles for Belgrade. So as you can see from the map, you can cover everything basically in Europe, Middle East, Russia, also a big portion of Africa. And anyways, we believe that this is more than enough for a regional jet, for a crossover jet. Most of the airlines will fly with this type of aircraft around 2 hours. So even competitors that offer a much bigger range, again, it's just additional weight that the aircraft should bring. But considering also the yield curve, when you fly more than 6 hours with a crossover jet, simply you cannot make money because of the yield curve.
Yeah.
So that's why we choose to have the perfect range and to balance with the best economics. In the previous slide, we were showing all the improvement, many outside, but also many inside. And as you can see in this nice picture, we have these new interiors. First of all, we kept our successful 2+2 no middle seat concept, especially now after the pandemic. We know that already before the pandemic, nobody probably wanted to fly in the middle seat, and now even more. So this is something that we've done many surveys, and all the passengers love it about it. We have new overhead bins. Every passenger is able to bring nowadays its own luggage on board. This is amazing.
And one of the great features on our overhead bins is they flip up open. So that's fantastic when an airline planner thinks about the speed of boarding and deboarding from the plane. If you have flip up bins, they can always stay open. It's much quicker to come onto the plane, stow your luggage, and then leave the plane, versus if you have to have the overhead bin intrude into the floor, that slows down the process, and I think that's an obstacle for airlines.
And regarding the one bag per pax, I guess many of you have experienced with the old narrow bodies that at one certain point of the boarding, the flight attendant has to take the luggage and then checked in, and then you have to take it later. So it's kind of annoying. And this is amazing because also we are the only one that have also space on the seat in front. So not only one baggage in the overhead bins, but also more space on the seat in front. And this helps, of course, the fast turnaround. Also, as Stefan mentioned, because the overhead bins are flashing in the ceiling. And then you can see the plane is very bright. We have bigger windows, so the ambience is very nice.
Very good. Peter and all of the participants of the 2021 CS Summit, we would like to thank you very much for your attention. And it was a pleasure for Daniele and for myself to be with you today. As we said in the get-go, we would love to hear from you. We'd be delighted to share our presentation and the material that we've shared with you today. And you can find us on LinkedIn, and looking forward to the conversations and the dialogue.
And
thank you very much. Voila.
Bye.
Bye-bye.